Hello everyone, Mike Levin, Free Hugs. Friday, May 25th, I guess around 8:30 or so, and I am going to do my walk to the ferry. I've actually already been working for a while, thinking about my work for today, and I thought I'd verbalize it. Things go through this sort of evolving, ideas evolve by being occurring to you, I guess, after a night's sleep, and then maybe being typed out in some quickly captured notes so you don't lose it. And now there's the talking through it, and then when I sit down I can actually start working because I've thought through the issues quite thoroughly. And it occurred to me there's always these sub-themes going on with my work, and I am definitely on I guess what I'd have to call, I said Pipulate is kind of like version 3 now. What that really means is I am dealing with my third level of evolved criteria for such systems, having solved and put behind me the main objective of version 1, which was just like to do anything at all, because capturing that magic, really having done something programming technical, the first thing after a Microsoft Excel macro, such that you have a higher level of reliability in daily scheduling and a lower amount of fragility and brittleness and vulnerability to viruses and everything else that comes along with Excel automation, or complexity in setting up SharePoint servers. Oh, don't get me started. But as soon as you actually see that encoding your ideas, the same ideas that are going into your Excel macro, can go into Python, and it's misnamed. If you follow my videos, I talk about how alpha and beta, the original yin or female type energy, gives rise to the original yang or male type energy, and then the first thing that happens is the two are reversed in a sort of effort to obfuscate or hide original alpha assets, what's valuable to you, and you don't want to dangle it in front of your adversaries, so you hide it. And a similar thing has happened with the naming of the Python programming language itself. I can't tell you how many times I talk to people, and when the very word Python rolls off your tongue, they sort of glaze over because they immediately, infer that that's male alpha machismo and it's a programmer language, which JavaScript is. Thank you. Einhart? I forget the exact. I got to get all these language founder names. Some of them are like superhero characters who I admire, and they have contrarian wisdom and go against the grain. Of course, John McCarthy doing Lisp is one of those, granddaddies of that whole movement. But there's other interesting ones. Larry Wall, who is a linguist, a cunning linguist who did Perl. And everything about that language follows the fact that he believes in, the opposite of dry programming principles. So something called dry has come along and has become really popular since the days of, Ruby on Rails, Ruby. When people discovered Rails and they discovered Ruby and they discovered this really brief, expressive, object-oriented scripting language, they realized that they could create wonderful reusable modules, take advantage of the benefits of object-oriented, or OO, and that leads to very dry mentality. Now, Python is, while it supports object-oriented, it does not encourage its use by design. You get into the weirdnesses, the strange idioms of Python. Before you do object-oriented in Python, everything seems perfectly straightforward. As soon as you get into OO, you need to start dealing with like underscore init classes, which are called dunder for double underline, dunder in its. And even just verbalizing stuff like that makes you think it is Python named after a snake, and it's more like languages like Java than it really is. It's something that you can get over, and it's something you don't have to deal with until you're proficient enough at the more straightforward functional, even that's a bad word. You're creating functions. It's not functional programming. You do often rely on the side effects of your functions, but there's so much background here that for people taking up a programming language and are deciding what to do, I advocate Python. It's got some weirdnesses and some people will guide you away from it. It's mostly surrounding its white space and its status as a interpreted as opposed to a compiled language like C or C#. But the truth is the lines are being blurred all over the place, with interpreted languages being more inherently dynamic. In other words, the output of a program being able to be fed into the input of a program and to create self-learning, machine learning type things. That's very often associated with dynamic languages like Lisp being the granddaddy of them, and JavaScript being one of the modern popular version. And then there's what else? Static languages, compiled, where the .exe that's created is for that particular machine, that particular hardware. Compiled executables are machine code that are dropped right into known hardware, and the machine instructions started to be carried out. It's a very different world than the interpreted world. Yet I say the lines are blurring because they have all these pre-compile steps along the line where it brings it just as far as it needs to and creates P code or pseudocode or ASM. There's all kinds of intermediary languages that can be chosen for this, and then keeps it there until a final just-in-time compile, which leaves open the availability to do the radical dynamic stuff like creating functions on the fly, self-modifying programs. So Python lives right in the middle, with Lisp being on the most dynamic side, compiled C being on the most static side, and Python's right in the middle and makes a very deliberate attempt to keep one foot on either side, although is not as wholeheartedly supporting of the dynamic side as more functional programming. And that dynamicness is called functional, so no side effects, so that things can change and you're not expecting static global elements and variables to stay there being changed through the running of functions. Functions can only take input, give output, and have no side effects themselves. So it of course encourages the use of outside database type services because you have to have persistence. The lack of side effects is an illusion in functional programming. You're just shifting around where persistence occurs. Which brings me to a lot of my work right now. It keeps coming up that whenever I talk about the types of apps I make, there's an automatic assumption that I'm warehousing vast quantities of data on my side. No. As soon as your project requires a database, your project is long-term expensive, or maybe even dead if you don't have the personal or organizational commitment to back your app up with that kind of storage and administration, because once there's accumulating data, do you trim it? Do you start to throw out data when it fills up, or do you let it fill up forever and just keep paying more and throwing more resources at that storage forever? So naturally, that's part of automation being an illusion, and you try and avoid collecting anything you're not going to need if it's not going to be looked up again in some actual highly likely to come thing, and not just based on the thought you might do it. If you know you're going to do it, fine, but that's where really good planning comes into play. You don't warehouse expensive long-term data unless it's a key component of your competitive advantage and your long-term plans, or else it's silly. It's like a double loss. You have to spend all the work to acquire it, and then you have to pay to maintain it forever, and you don't use it to make more money to pay. If you don't create righteous, positive feedback loops, then you're burying yourself. The way to avoid burying yourself is to not start shoveling that data on in the first place and just hit the API and make more intelligent use of the API from the sources where you're pulling the data from. If time ranges are supported, big win, because you can ask for data back in time. Consequently, you don't have to do time samples. A lot of services only give you the snapshots of the way things look like right now at this point in time. And that's terrible. You know, that's them taking shortcuts and providing an inferior product on their side. You know, a vendor who provides the data should provide their own long-term warehousing of all the pre-aggregate data, or else you're getting ripped off for using them as your vendor. Because they're trying to get you to warehouse all your sequential time series data locally in the warehouse. Raw data, aggregate, you know, they're shifting so many decisions on you that should be part of the data provider's mission, that look for a different data provider. You know, welcome to the modern world. You know, you're not going to do everything yourself. There's always going to be dependencies. We're all standing on the shoulders of other giants. You choose the giants on whose shoulders you stand. I choose Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, which basically means, you know, Dennis and Ken and Linus Torvalds for Linux, and you know, Guido Van Rossum and the ABC team for Python, and Vim, that would be Bill Joy, one of the other granddaddies of the modern computing world, who is seldom acknowledged but is out there, like Dennis Ritchie, who invented C, or, you know, let's see, other big unacknowledged ones. Pike, who did the file systems, and well, anyway, there's a whole bunch of, you know, great pioneers out there whose names are behind a lot of these tools. Getting back to, that was Vim. Bram Moliner took over the VI project, essentially, you know, free, and the reverse engineered it. You know, all these people, you know, unless the code has been entered into the free and open source world with licenses, people reverse engineer and bring the same functionality by just black boxing it, looking at something from the outside, providing the same functionality. That's how Linux happened. I'm not exactly sure if that's how VI, Bill Joy's creation from back in the, you know, late 60s, early 70s, was directly lifted by Bram, who did Vim. But at any rate, it's Bill Joy and Bram Moliner who are the giants whose shoulders you stand on for Vim. And then finally Git, which is Linus Torvalds again, and then I guess it's a bitstream people before, I don't know the names there, but distributed revision control systems. Very powerful concept. A lot of understanding how the world works comes in understanding Git and main branches and forking and merging. I mean, wow. I think, you know, no, that's another video. I think it's like in all my videos, Linux, Python, Vim, Linux, Python, Vim, and I always stop short of talking about Git, and there's good solid reasons, because the command lines stuff is strange and difficult to master, and you may never do it, but you still got to use it. So it's like that one tool you keep in your toolbox that, you know, as long as you might know that one way it's used and you do it over and over to do, you know, just sequential backing up of your main branch of code, which is pretty much how I use Git all the time, the Pipulate project. How many other people participate in my GitHub projects? I get a merge like once a year. So yeah, staying on choosing our tools. You can't get away from dependencies. Vendors, so you're going to be dependent on vendors no matter what type of project you're doing. It's not like you're going to burn your processors from sand. So you just choose, and you choose in such a way, and now this comes down to who you are and what your goals and purposes are, your objectives. And for me, the journey is the reward. I couldn't care less about money. I like having it, but I like having it for what it represents. You know, I'll be in Anaheim at the end of next month with my daughter, meeting Jaden Animations and Odd Ones Out. You know, and I can just do that because that's something she expressed the interest in doing. And because I used some skills that started out definitely not nearly as valuable in the market, and then started making a series of small tweaking decisions towards web and web development, and then SEO, and now from SEO towards data mastering. Not data science. I think data science is a little bit pretentious. I don't think you need those PhDs or to be able to write the data models in order to glue them together. And if you're just a gluing them together guy like I am, we're focusing on the algorithms of how things are glued together and the processes and the sequences in which things are happening and the locations thing. You know, I'm a logistics person, really. I'm an operations person. So to build that logistics and operational stuff up into science, well, sure, everything has some science or art to it, but we are skilled craftsmen and technicians, and should, you know, feel free about pursuing mastery, and I certainly do, but then use the word master, you know, imply that whole, you put in the 10,000 hours, 10 years thing, call yourself what you are, data master. And so that's kind of like the, you know, my spiel these days. I'm not trying to really make money off it. I make a little chump change off of the YouTube advertising, but I don't even turn on the advertising on my videos until a few weeks later, so that all my loyal followers have a chance to watch them without the ads. That's of more value to me. Everything has value. You're always trading one thing of value for another thing of value, and that's just life. I was going to say the human condition, but no, it's life. You take in resources, you use some higher order templating capability that life has to make those resources into something else and transform it to another state, different state of matter, you know, or of information, and extract a little something for yourself out of that that keeps you living, that keeps the system stable. And as long as you do that, you're part of the deal. Extract your bits. You know, the rest of it is just controlling all these little dials and parameters. Some people love business and they decide to become billionaires early in life. God bless them. But I couldn't imagine a more horrible fate than to be a prisoner of your own success too early in life. Think how much of life you're just going to miss because you can't walk around unrecognized, and no one in your life, from the moment you gain that success, it's a Mark Zuckerberg type effect. From the moment you achieve that success, you can't trust anyone you meet after that point to be interested in you for the real you. They might just be a gold digger. So, or a hanger-on, or a member of your posse, or whatever that is. So, you know, I often say, I heard Alan Alda express it once, if you can choose between rich and famous, choose rich. And, you know, fly low under the radar, do your thing, enjoy life. And if it gets too hard for you, just adjust those dials. And I'm always doing that. SEO. The necessary evil. The Art of War opens with the paragraph, you know, because survival is necessary and, you know, fighting is necessary for survival, it is therefore necessary to take up the art of fighting. Oh my God. So, you know, nothing could express my philosophy in life better than that. You only should find it necessary to engage in adversarial behavior because you're in that game, and if you don't, your life will be shorter and of a less quality or enjoyable nature. So I'm making the presumption that the quality and your enjoyment of life has value, even if it's not by other people's standards. You know, keep walking on your own path. Let them talk. They have their own issues, right? If they have enough time to talk about you, think about what that says about their own lives. And videos like this, 20 minutes in, and here I am at the ferry. Okay, that answers my question. It takes almost exactly 20 minutes to get here, which, considering the food for the soul that a walk like this is, compared to rushing to catch the train, waiting for the train, getting on the train, getting off the train, you know, all just to get in a rush into a crowd of people you can't avoid anyway. I think walking to the ferry is in my future. I'll try and get more in phase with the rest of the business day, but boy, I'll tell you, working through my latest problems, being out of phase has helped a lot. And I was talking about being on version 3 of Pipulate. There it is. I'm gonna have to stop the video soon anyway, and I bring it full circle. I am on, oh, that looks just like my car. I am on third order considerations. You know, third generation considerations. First generation, being infatuated with the fact you can even make something come alive. Let's say it's a basic editing system, create, record, edit, delete, CRUD system like Ruby on Rails, and you make a little app to like make a task list or project manager, and you're like, oh yay. And to customize it takes an enormous amount of work, and it becomes a whole tangle spaghetti code because you're not good at the programming language, or you chose the wrong programming language for the project. And it becomes something that's hard for other people to look at and maintain, and it gets broken up over multiple files. The MVC model is one of the worst things to happen to this sort of stuff ever, because oh my god, where do you go to do what? You think it's separation of concerns, but all it really is some programmer's idea of separation of concerns, and they might have got it wrong. So making it work at all, first version. Second version, getting rid of your biggest complaint about the first version. For me, it was the size of the config files. So I had all this, you know, that's where I got into a convention, a framework by convention, all this conventional behavior, the way things normally work. If you just point the first initializer somewhere saying, this application is made from this table, and then some code would come in and investigate the foreign key relationships and unique constraints of all the SQL, you know, basically have an idea of the ERD of the whole application in its mind from an interrogation of the tables, which of course requires deep vendor proprietary knowledge of how that SQL server works. In my case, it did happen to be Microsoft SQL Server, and I did this with VB script under Active Server page. But my config files got incredibly short, and apps would just spring into existence. That wasn't even Pipulate. This was back when I was doing Ruby on Rails type stuff, rather than dashboard type stuff. Believe it or not, it's different. I'm doing mostly querying, mostly selects and not updates anymore. There are some updates, but not for the purpose of maintaining some back-end business system, thank God. Leave that to career people. All I'm doing is lightly coming in and reporting on it, like, you know, the monkey in the middle, the API, you know, acrobat in the middle. And I'm really enjoying that. So iterations 1, iterations 2, iterations 3 takes care of these much more, well, no, yeah, more, even more radical simplicity. Extreme customization on this side, getting most of the things you ask for with less work and less code on this side. Radical reduction of complexity, radical readability, radical mainstream techniques and methods so that anyone who looks at it is looking at something that's both short, understandable, matches examples they'll find on the web, uses logical variable names. The list goes on, but basically, even if it scrolls long, even if it scrolls 10 pages, as you read down it top from bottom, avoiding creating functions, taking advantage of a script language for what it is, runs better in Jupyter Notebook when it's not in functions, and then consider that whole thing the root level of your module. There's nothing wrong with that in Python. Other programming language people will tell you you have to wrap that whole main in a function. The only things outside of that are global things. The global things, because Python modules can call each other and nest each other, those things at global are just at root scope when they're imported by another module. So don't sweat keeping your scripts as scripts, reading top down, avoiding functions and only using them when absolutely necessary, when it actually simplifies, not starting out with def key name and creating a function for everything you do, because it blows away the sequentiality. Now you got to jump around, and the sequentiality is not implicit top down, just like indenting is implicit with a white space in Python. Keep your top-down code execution implicit. Keep your code scope nesting implicit with a white space. You don't have a choice about that one. And everything will become forever simpler. copying and pasting from Jupyter Notebook, where you can sort of feel your way through things, over to a .py file where you can drop it into a cron-like scheduler. I use systemd more easily. It becomes very simple, and this whole ricocheting back and forth of things from experimenting in Jupyter Notebook to 24/7 scheduling in systemd becomes habit. And can you imagine that when you have like 30 or 40 reports running daily and it's no big, and you're not even using a deployment system like Ansible or anything, you just have a couple of Python scripts that are doing it. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.